Point. We got a great show for you guys today. We've got a point sent in by Russell Simmons, who is, of course, the founder of Def Jam Records. So it's great to have him on the show. And he's also, of course, wants to talk about the Occupy Wall Street future. We've got somebody from Occupy LA here with us on the panel. So that's going to be a great discussion. And we've got a writer from Nation magazine, Ilyse Hogue, who actually makes a very unexpected point about Citizens United. That's also really interesting discussion. And then our third point is going to be about an HIV-positive former professional wrestler who has been convicted and given a sentence for having sex without a condom. So once again, I'm not sure where that discussion is going to go, but it is going to be fascinating. And let me introduce the panel to you guys. Robin Kelley is a professor of history and an award-winning author. He teaches at UCLA. Robin, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
And Manjusha Kulkarni is executive director of the South Asian Network. Manju, great to have you here.
Thank you.
And then Patrick Meighan is an activist who was at Occupy LA and is a writer for a sitcom that some of you might have heard of called Family Guy.
Hi.
Hey. And so first we're going to start with Russell Simmons. He's got a really interesting point to make about the Occupy movement. Let's watch.
Hi, I'm Russell Simmons, and the point is we have to get the money out of politics. The other point is that we have to have a constitutional amendment to do so right away. I'm thankful for Occupy Wall Street in so many ways, but it's given me now an opportunity, given America, it's given the president a chance to talk about economic inequality. And I think it's a very important thing. People are sometimes, they were a little bit oblivious, I think, to the issues. And Occupy Wall Street, the minute I looked out my window, because they were right out my window in Zuccotti Park, and they told me it was called Occupy Wall Street. I said, oh, they're at Wall Street because Wall Street controls their future. And that's the demon. It's not Wall Street the problem, it's Wall Street's control of their future that's the problem. We'd like the power to go back to the people and away from the corporations. That makes good sense. You know, we want the people to control this democracy. Occupy Wall Street allows us to have a lot of different conversations at one time. There are things that are being discussed in the Congress that would not be discussed otherwise. And there are things that are being discussed everywhere regarding economic inequality, specific things that come up and implications of different conditions that we have that are being discussed that would not be discussed. But we have to take that energy and put it into specific reform. We created something called Occupy the Dream. And Occupy the Dream is an old Martin Luther King idea, that we get the civil rights community together with the unions, along with the young creative minds that are going to march with them. And those are, we call them Occupy Wall Street. We get them all together, we create Occupy the Dream, and we include some celebrities, some rock stars, some rap stars, and it's going to be a tremendous education process. So we bring them all maybe to Washington on one day. We have a major march, like Dr. King talked about and dreamed about. But it was about people with the common interests and understanding of where they were locked out, and they agreed that they needed change and economic equality. That's what it's about now. And so that's what Occupy the Dream represents. It represents a march. It represents a series of marches and education process that will get people to understand what is the core. What are some of the core reasons, and what is the number one core reason for this economic inequality? And I think it's pretty obvious to a lot of people. It's becoming more and more obvious. Even as we try to educate people, we start to see it everywhere throughout the media. It's because of the corporations and special interest control of our government. That's why the jobs are overseas in many cases. That's why you have no health care. That's why the prison industrial complex locks up all of these people to fill these prisons. A future for some Occupy Wall Street participants is to join the Occupy the Dream movement, which is meant solely to get the money out of politics and solely to promote a much greater democracy. That's the point of Occupy the Dream. I'm Russell Simmons. I'm out of breath. That's my point.
Yeah, it's great to have Russell participate on the program here on The Point. Let me start with you, Robin. I'm sorry, let me start with Patrick, actually. Look, you've been involved in the Occupy LA movement. In fact, you got arrested.
I got arrested.
So first tell us that story, because that's interesting.
To try and sort of boil it down, I was one of the folks around the tent, and we were linked arms and said, we weren't going to leave when the police said that we had to leave. And, in other places, the way they got people to unlink was they used batons or they used pepper spray. In our case, what they did is they cleared all the press out, and the few press folks who were there were embedded, and they had promised not to show it. But they went to one guy, 2 over from me, and said, okay, are you going to unlink? And he said, no. So they took his one leg out, and they twisted it all the way around, and they sort of stomped their boot sort of down on his foot. And then they grabbed his other foot and they twisted it all the way around the other way until he screamed in agony and let go. And then they put the cuffs on him, and there he was arrested. And apparently that's supposed to be better than being pepper sprayed in the face. Like, I was terrified. So, they did the same thing to the guy 2 over from me, and then that guy, and then they got to me. I'm like, hey, I'm unlinking. I'm happy to go with you. And so I, stood up and sort of put my hands behind my back, and they jammed my hands way up, sort of up towards my neck, and it hurt so bad I sort of leaned away, and they yelled, he's resisting! So they threw me, and I landed down on my face. Of course, my hands are behind my back, so I landed right on my face, and they came down with their knee, and that was lots of fun. And then they put me in jail, and I stayed there for about 26 hours.
Manju, what's going on here, right? Because he's right. I mean, if any other crime, if you post bail, you're out, right? Unless you are considered a danger, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we had William Bratton on the show, former LA police chief, on the Young Turks just yesterday, okay, on current television. And he said, oh, well, LA police have gotten wide acclaim for how well they handled Occupy, right? And it was kind of frustrating to see. Do you think this is political, where the mayors, Democrat or Republican, are trying to send a message here saying we're not interested in this kind of protest movement?
Right. Absolutely. I think what we saw is, and in fact, over the last several years, with the media being really complicit in it, is looking at any type of protest or revolt as something really that should be demonized and not encouraged, even though, we talk about free speech and we talk about active participation in our democracy. When folks go, and actually you have to look at who those folks are too, right? When they don't, because when they look like Tea Partiers, apparently that's okay. Then they're mainstream. They're the citizens who are actually really exercising their free speech. But I think in this particular case, and I think there's actually another important point, which is that the media can't handle anything that's not about specific objectives. And so in this particular case, you just simply had folks who were trying to raise awareness, as Russell Simmons said, and they didn't have actual legislative goals and objectives. And so the media is wondering, what's going on? These are just homeless folks. These are drunk folks. And so that's why I think you had that demonization that's then followed by Viragosa saying this is LAPD's finest moment.
Finest hour, yeah.
Right. So that goes to a great point, which is something that Russell was pointing out too. And by the way, this hypocrisy is just rife in our government. Somebody made a great point the other day. They said Bradley Manning would have been much better off committing a war crime rather than reporting on a war crime. Because if you did the war crime, you would have been free to go, right? That's happened over and over again. But if you actually tell the American public about it, that's a danger. So it looks like, Robin, that everybody's trying to protect the establishment, right? Maybe they don't, Viragosa might not even realize he's doing that, right? But yet it leads in that direction. But Manju made a good point. Should they have a central point so that everybody understands this is what the Occupy movement is about, and hence I'm with it or I'm against it, and probably a lot of people would be with it.
Right. Well, this has been a major debate since the origins of the movement. That is, should there be a set of issues, a single issue? When you look at the original declaration, there are like 15 or 16 different issues that united people. What distinguishes Occupy as a social movement from other movements that are single issue is that it tries to make connections between income inequality, race inequality, issues around campaign finance. In other words, campaign finance reform was already part of the agenda. Housing, foreclosures. One of, I guess, my disagreement with Russell Simmons, though I agree that campaign finance reform is necessary and fundamental, I don't disagree with that. I think that the issue of income inequality wasn't meant to be a talking point. The idea was that you're supposed to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And so we've just begun to think about how to do something about it. And in addition, it hasn't been talked about enough. I mean, one of the amazing statistics that is not talked about enough is the fact that there's a kind of racial wealth gap that's huge. 2009, the median wealth for a white family was $113,000. For African American families, it was about $5,700. For Latino families, about $6,300. So you have 20 times more wealth around race.
Robin, I totally agree with that. And in fact, the recession hit minorities harder than anyone else. Whites lost about 16% of their wealth, but African Americans lost over 50%. Right. Latinos lost 2/3 of their wealth because of this recession. It's amazing the devastation that happened. But I would argue that campaign finance reform is the overwhelming #1 issue, because you're not going to get any movement on income inequality, racial inequality, et cetera, until you do campaign finance reform, because money has swamped the system. What do you guys think?
It's a chicken and an egg thing, I think. And to me, I think I'm falling down on Robin's side, truthfully, because I think that allegedly undemocratic electoral models, like, for example, our current one where money, plays such an important part of the process, I don't think that they're a cause of the sickness. I think that they're a symptom of the sickness. And I think the actual cause of the sickness is wealth inequality, is the fact that the top 1% control 33% of our nation's wealth, the top 10% control like 70% of our nation's wealth, and the bottom 50% control 2.5% of our nation's wealth. You can't have a republic that way. And if you do have a constitutional convention and you mandate, fully financed public elections, that's a great start. It's better than blood in the streets. And, as a parent of 2 young children, I'd like to try that first, before we really just sort of throw the cards in there and see what happens to them. But my fear is that the money will always find a way in. As long as the inequality is that pervasive, there's always going to be Congress people who, even if they got in with fully financed elections, they want to know what their next job is. And, Pfizer's hiring. Well, sorry, but I'm going to go ahead and rule Pfizer's
I hear you, but the reason we have income inequality, I think, so much is because they fixed the tax system, because they bought the politicians. That's what led to the income inequality.
I think in this case, I completely agree with Patrick in that, you have such a huge behemoth. It's like, would we ever get single-payer health care? No, because the insurance lobby is so tremendous. Just in 2011, $3.2 billion was spent only on lobbying of Congress folks and other federal officials. And so I think it actually is nearly impossible to get that. The other problem, though, getting to Robin's point, is that while there was a January 11th Pew poll that found that while 66% of Americans think that there are either very strong or strong class conflicts in the United States now between the rich and the poor, but at the same time, a Gallup study found that only 45% of Americans think that it's actually that income inequality is something that needs to even be fixed. Right. So I think there's a lot more that needs to be done in that area, and that one is really not going to necessarily, I think it may be a start to fixing the other, but it's a much more pervasive and baseline issue.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
No, absolutely not. What about? Okay, now, real quick.
What do you think would happen? If 1% of our nation controls 30% of the wealth, and then tomorrow we fix all the laws so that people are forced to run with public financing, what are those 1% going to do? Just sort of blithely hand their money over?
No, I think 2 things, just real quick. #1, if you do public financing of elections, and #2, you end corporate personhood, which turns off the faucet of unlimited corporate money pouring into politics, then at least you have an even playing field where democracy matters again. And here's my proof of that. In the 1970s, that was the case. And in fact, progressives ran roughshod. It was fantastic. Ralph Nader got OSHA. We got Nixon to pass the EPA. If we actually had a democracy, the country is massively progressive, and we could address all those issues. In the 1970s, the top 1% only controlled 9% of the wealth. Right?
And see, the question is how that happened. Because I don't disagree with the importance of campaign finance reform. I think part of what we have to do is look at the history. So there's 2 questions to ask. One, how did the income gap shrink? In the 1890s, it was a huge gap. By the 1950s and 60s, that gap shrunk. How did it do? Strong trade unions, a New Deal that was a product of trade union organizing, as well as a federal government that was forced by organizing to deal with working class. A strong safety net. We had a welfare state. So we had all these things in place.
Don't forget, there were actual hardcore like anarchists and communists and socialists who were actually part of the political process that forced the Democrats and liberal Republicans to come over to that side. Like those third parties have been so carefully excised from the system.
I think my last point on this is that I think we can all agree that the 1% has taken over. They've taken over the politics, and it's led to great inequality on all the things that you guys are talking about, and we've got to find a way around it. And I agree with you, as I think probably statistically a member of the 1%. All right. Okay. So there you have it.
I need to get fucked in the ass because I have it too easy. And I mean that, I don't mean the first part for real, but the second part I actually mean for real. Like, I have kids and I want them to live in a functioning society, and a society that only works for their rich dad is not a society that works for all of us, including them.
That's got to be the last point.
Right.
I can't think of ending on a higher note.
I apologize.
So when we come back, Ilyse Hogue from The Nation has a really interesting point about Citizens United. Did it actually help us in some ways? Uh-oh. Fascinating. We'll talk about it when we come back. Our next point comes from Ilyse Hogue, who is a writer for Nation magazine. And she's talking about Citizens United, but there's an interesting twist to her point. Let's watch.
Hi, I'm Ilyse Hogue, and I read regular column at The Nation. Thanks for having me on the show today. My point is that what if we've reached a critical mass with Citizens United that has actually started to swing the pendulum the other way? Let's consider two separate sides of the equation. For progressive movements who had become increasingly reliant on paid media strategies, we've seen a reversion to old school organizing tactics mixed with new savvy netroots strategies that have allowed us significant victories since the beginning of the year. SOPA and PIPA, the Wisconsin recall, and the Keystone Pipeline were all made possible not from paid advertising, but from people actually getting together, brainstorming interesting things to do, and creating new alliances. On the flip side, we're seeing super PACs with unlimited dollars actually start to cancel each other out. They bought all the available airtime in South Carolina. Hundreds of millions of dollars will go into this election. While less and less people are watching TV, we're seeing a rise of people power and a questionable impact of an oversaturation of paid advertising on the way people think. And I think the formula together for that is that Citizens United actually may have united the citizens, all for the good of democracy. Thanks for having me on. You can check me out at my blog at thenation.com.
Manju, do we have an ironic twist here that Citizens United might have galvanized the progressive movement and plus cancel each other out, I guess, with Gingrich and Romney destroying each other?
Right. I think Ilyse makes a really good point, because I think if you look at on the state level with the Wisconsin recall and in Ohio in terms of overturning the anti-union legislation, we've had some really significant victories. And then on the national front with Keystone and then the birth control efforts that were successful just last week. And what I see here really, though, is voters being frustrated by what's going on, seeing the domination of money, and really just exploring the old tools. And at the South Asian Network, I mean, that's, grassroots organizing is really one of our fundamental strategies as we try to advance the health, solidarity, and empowerment of South Asian Americans in Southern California. And we've been, really, when you want to talk about movement building, which is more than just electoral politics, you're talking about raising awareness, you're talking about active involvement of your citizenry. And then you're talking about policy advocacy. And essentially what I think this has done is, as you said, galvanized folks to say, look, this is not just going to be, we're not going to allow it to be about money anymore. Right. But I do think that the Democratic Party has been about money and about corporate money for a long time. And so what we need to have happen is what happens, David Frum said about Republicans. They fear their base and Democrats loathe their base. We, on the progressive side, need them to fear us so that they do the right thing. And that's exactly what happened just with the birth control issue, which is that President Obama, against the Catholic Church, came out in favor of requiring all health plans to cover, as part of preventive health care, birth control.
Right. Look, on the fearing your base, I couldn't agree more. People that drive me crazy are like, no, support Obama. If you clap louder, he'll do what we want, which has not been the case so far. But, you know, Robin, I'm both incredibly hopeful and deeply cynical at the same time on this issue. I think that if we galvanize everybody on what we were talking about before, fighting Citizens United, Ilyse is referring to, whether it's the amendment, campaign finance reform, I think it can definitely work. But, you know, we delay Keystone. You know, if a Republican wins, no question it gets approved. If Obama wins, I think they're going to approve it anyway, right?
He's already invited TransCanada to resubmit a new route that just goes around an aquifer to. Personally, like, I'll bet anybody here $5 that if Obama gets reelected.
Not 10,000.
Not 10,000, $5. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so Robin, I mean, what's your sense? Can we win with grassroots movements? Are they real victories? Or do we need to do something else?
Well, we don't have a choice. You have to win with grassroots organizing. There's no other alternative. I mean, money in media doesn't win campaigns, elections, or make things stop. Sometimes it means civil disobedience. Sometimes it means, you know, electoral politics. But it's the only choice we have. And I think we have to be reminded always that part of the upsurge that led to Wisconsin, Occupy, the sort of U.S. spring, if you will, had much to do with previous organizing. In other words, there was a U.S. Social Forum. There was a lot of organizations already out there. There was all these movements. Domestic Workers United, for example, had a great victory in New York, and we'll have one in California, getting a Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. There's Walmart stores that are being attempting to have a place in inner city communities that are being opposed. And I think that kind of mobilization at the grassroots always succeeds. Will there be defeats? Of course there will be defeats. Will Keystone come? Probably. But there's so many fronts to fight on. And I think that there's no choice, there's no alternative but mass mobilization and methods of organizing that are really kind of old-fashioned.
Patrick, do we have to pull in right-wingers here in order to win? Because whether it's a constitutional amendment, you need 3/4 of the states to do that, or when we defeated, for the moment being, SOPA and PIPA, conservatives are also on our side. Auditing the Fed, conservatives are also on our side. Right. And if we need them, how do we pull them in?
I don't know, but we got to. That is the only way. And you know, when I was sort of spending some time at the Occupy encampment, which was not a lot of time, it was a couple nights, but you know, I remember occasionally engaging with people, and you know, and different issues would come up that maybe were away from the issue of sort of recapturing, you know, our democratic republic, right? And in almost every case, I sort of thought, well, listen, that's going to be for the people to decide. You know, oh, should we ban chemtrails? Well, let's decide that, but you know, the people need to sort of like recapture our own democracy, you know, and so conservatives, I think, need to know that you know, for any sort of fundamental change to be undergone, that you know, that will allow us to sort of like, you know, put our own hands back on the republic that we're supposed to own, that some of the subsequent victories may end up being theirs, and that we as Americans have to say, well, you know, listen, as long as, you know, our fundamental rights aren't being violated, like, you know, okay, conservatives, like, you've won this one, but, you know, at this point, yeah, it's going to require that. You know, the progressive base of America is not nearly large enough to create that sort of fundamental change.
You know, so then at least a couple of ironic victories on the Republican primary side, right? One, Ron Paul is galvanizing conservatives, libertarians on this actual civil liberties issue that we totally agree on. Yeah. And second of all, Manju, they're ripping each other apart. They're the guys who are the bad guys, Romney and Gingrich.
Right, and when you're talking about what's happening in the Republican Party, I mean, the one way in which money has not been as influential as it could be is the fact that Rick Perry dropped out of the race, and that Newt Gingrich is actually doing quite well for the limited resources that he has. I actually think that we're not going to be able to form a coalition of progressives and conservatives on this unless by some miracle, Obama and the Democrats raised so much money that the Republicans have to claim poverty, as they did even last time, right? You hear them talking about it over and over again.
That would be another ironic thing.
Right. That they're already saying, oh, he's going to raise $1 billion. And if he does that with the Democrats and then they win the presidency in both houses, you may see that. But I think anything short of that, you're not going to see it. And I just want to make one other point, which I'm not sure that the SOPA and PIPA thing actually has to not do with money. I think it does absolutely.
No
because
the internet companies are gigantic and they're pouring in money by the truckloads.
Right.
In fact, Patrick Leahy basically admitted this is like his Job Creation Act for lobbyists because they're all coming in. Because Hollywood had already bought them, but the internet companies had not bought them sufficiently.
Right.
So
Silicon Valley, nowadays, really does contribute almost as much as Hollywood itself does. So, I wish it were the case that, hey, the little guys stood up and the big guys went away running. Well, it's like the little guys stood up, but the little guys have stood up before. The Electronic Freedom Foundation writes lots of model legislation that may as well just throw it right down a toilet. But if you get Google and you get Yahoo, on your side, suddenly they're listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that ties all this together is these ironic victories. So, Robin, as you look at this, I think, it's a point I hadn't heard before, Manju, and it's a really good one, that if Obama comes in with a crushing amount of money, if Newt Gingrich comes in and says, beats Mitt Romney, and the Republican establishment gets pissed, and he did it just on the one donor, Sheldon Adelson, and then they say, wait a minute now, other Republicans might say, I don't like this one guy deciding the election, right? And then they run into the Obama machine, and Obama crushes them with money. Maybe, because the only way you get anything done in this country, it seems like, is if Republicans do it, right? It's sad, but it's true. Maybe if you put all those events together, maybe we get dead Republicans go, you know what, let's get the goddamn money out.
But that proceeds from the assumption that Newt Gingrich and that Mitt Romney call the shots in the Republican Party. And I personally don't believe that they do. The people who call the shots in the Republican Party are the people behind Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich writing the checks. And they're okay with one guy swinging the election. Yeah. And as long as they are okay with that, I don't think it's going to change.
Yeah, we could say something similar about the Democratic Party because we're talking about big money. Yeah. And my fear, I suppose, in answering your question, is whether or not Democrats would then support campaign finance if their man is winning. In other words, if their people are winning, maybe it's not an issue. But I think it's an ethical issue. It's a constitutional issue, I think. It's a democratic issue. And I think it has to be talked about that way, as the denial of democracy and full participation.
Yeah, and look, that's why it's my final point on this is that it's very important for progressives to understand that when Democrats win, progressives don't necessarily win. So you have to insist that they do things that are progressive, because otherwise they'll just keep taking the money and call it big Democratic victories, and we go, so what, if it didn't get us the progressive ideals that we hope for. Welcome back to The Point. Now for our third discussion, we're going to go to the case of Andre Davis, a professional wrestler who was HIV positive and was tried for actually possibly spreading that disease around by having sex without a condom and not telling his partners. Let's go to a Channel 9 News report in Cincinnati.
Former wrestler who never told his many sexual partners he's HIV positive.
Andre Davis apologized in court right after receiving his sentence.
And I truly am sorry for my actions.
One of Davis's victims, who did not wish to be identified, read a statement in court today.
I watched you sit through this entire trial with a smile on your face, and that shows just how selfish, hateful, and cold-hearted you are. Andre, you deserve everything that's happening to you, and I pray God has mercy on your soul.
Robin, he got 32 years in prison. Is that right? Is it too tough?
I think it's unfair. I think that the law itself is problematic. I mean, what it does is it criminalizes HIV. It criminalizes a disease. And I think that it sets a dangerous precedent for criminalizing, let's say, women who may have children and have sex without a condom, if they know the partner is HIV positive, for example. I mean, it could work both ways. I mean, my concern is that we have all these cases of medical violence in some ways, institutionalized violence, whether it's the syphilis studies in Guatemala and Tuskegee or other kinds of cases like that, and no one's prosecuted. And so here's this guy, another African-American male, who what he did I think is maybe morally reprehensible. But the question is it really illegal, and does it set a precedent for criminalizing anyone who's HIV positive?
That's interesting. And look, then if you can do it for HIV, can you do it for syphilis, chlamydia, crabs? I don't know, how far can it go? On the other hand, I'm not sure I disagree with him being prosecuted here. Manju, you're a lawyer. What do you think?
Well, I think it, is potentially a case of a solution looking for a problem. I mean, how many cases in Ohio do you have where individuals have failed to disclose their HIV status? In just one of the neighboring states in Iowa, there were apparently, before this law was enacted, only 32 cases. It's almost the same really as the voter fraud that the Republicans are claiming. There's almost no evidence of it, and yet they're passing all these laws. So I wonder in this case, to me the bigger issue, Cenk, is about the fact that more than half of African American males in this country without a high school diploma go to prison at some point or the other. I wonder if we would have had the same thing happen if Andre Davis were not African American. Would we still have this kind of sentence? Would we have 32 years behind bars? And then, of course, the bigger issue, too, of how many people we're imprisoning overall. This is just a nation now where we are essentially putting hundreds of thousands of people, millions, right? 6 million people behind bars right now.
13% of African-American males have entered the prison system in some way, which is outrageous. And if you notice, one of the victims, they didn't show her face, but they showed her hands. She was white. Has that been relevant in the past? Absolutely. But, Patrick, I mean, let's say I sleep with a woman, she doesn't tell me she's got HIV, and then I get HIV, and in the past it was a death sentence. Luckily, right now, it still kills people, no question about it. You might be able to survive. I would be beyond pissed. I might think it's criminal.
Well, yeah, and the thing is she will go to prison because, assuming it's against the law, because we live in a nation of laws. And when you violate the law in this country, you go to jail. That's just how it works. So, like, for example, when Citigroup created these fraudulent mortgage securities and knew that they were fraudulent and worthless, and then sold them to their customers and then secretly shorted them, which was, massive fraud. All of those executives went to prison, is my understanding. And
maybe
then,
if they were black.
And then when the Bush administration ordered, torture and unlawful detention of citizens, including American citizens, in violation of federal law and international law, all of those Bush administration officials, including the vice president and president, they went to prison, right? Because we live in a nation where if you break the law, you are punished. And so it's too bad for Andre Davis and too bad for this woman who you gave sweet love to, but that's the country we live in,
and
it or not.
And I assure you, it would have been sweet.
I'm sure you did a great job.
So, look, I hear you guys, and God, the injustice grows every day. The CIA officer, Curacao, who exposed the waterboarding, now being tried under the Espionage Act.
Right.
But the guys who did the waterboarding, not tried at all.
Right.
You do the torture, you're fine. The guy who destroyed the tapes, 92 tapes destroyed, wildly illegal, no prosecution. You expose it, you're going to jail.
The guys in Haditha who just totally smoked 24 women and children and then, covered it over. They just got sentenced the other day to...
But you got to be fair.
Yeah.
They could get up to 3 months, and that guy goes down back to private.
That's a good point.
Wow.
No, that is a good point. And, no, absolutely. And he may have to clean up to 1/4 of one latrine.
So we got him. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. Now,
laws.
having said that, guys, I hear you guys on all those points. But none of you think that it should... I mean, look at all the countries that criminalize it in some ways. 34 states here in the U.S., and then you got Canada, UK, Germany, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, all criminalizing this act. I don't think it's crazy to criminalize it. I think, if especially when HIV used to be a death sentence, luckily, it's not as much anymore.
Right.
But somebody gives you a disease without telling you, without a condom, without notice, I think it is criminal.
Yeah, but it doesn't. This is not to condone the behavior at all. In fact, it is to say that it opens up the door for a lot of possible ways of repressing people and controlling sexuality. In other words, it opens up the door for the invasion of people's private lives. What I think is more important is balancing the cost of sending him to prison for 32 years, which is what, about $28,000 to $35,000 a year, versus money that can go into these questions of solving, really eliminating HIV/AIDS, dealing with health crises. In other words, investing in transforming the culture that we're in, to me seems to be sort of more urgent.
And I hear you that the punishment certainly could be disproportionate. We don't even know if any of the women actually got infected.
Right.
But Manju, if it happened to you, would you want the prosecution to do something?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't even have to think of it happening to me as so much as, the issue is actually a very real one in South Asia, which is that routinely South Asian women have found themselves being HIV positive because of their partners who travel, they're truck drivers, they have other professions where they do use prostitutes and sex workers pretty regularly, and then they don't disclose it to their wives, and then the women find themselves, through essentially no fault of their own, being HIV positive. So I do think, I would agree with you that in terms of, gender issues, this can be seen as a very positive thing.
Speaking, in those situations, is it legal or is it illegal, or does it vary by the nation in South Asia?
You mean
what you just described? No, not
India,
even prostitution. In India, for example, what you just described, like, say one of those, truck drivers, like, knew that he had contracted HIV and slept with a prostitute. Like in India, for example, is he then liable for criminal prosecution?
Yeah, I think that he actually is. So, and the problem there too is the gender issues that compound this, which is, the way people view women and sex, and then they immediately put blame on the woman for being HIV positive in a way that they wouldn't on her male counterpart.
Right, and like in some countries it's out of control. In Saudi Arabia there was a case, woman gets raped, and she gets pregnant, and they say, well, we know you had sex outside of marriage, so you're going to jail. Right. But according to the Quran, you need 4 witnesses to put the guy away. You don't have 4 witnesses, he's free to go, you're in jail, which is insanity, right? Yeah. And by the way, what is it about truck drivers? Whenever it's always a story about truck drivers, obviously they had to get whores. Is that like part of the job when you sign up for a truck driver? Every story's like that. Yeah. All right, let me get a final tally here. Would you have put him in jail at all or free to go? Which way?
That's hard, because I don't think jail time, but yet at the same time something else has to happen. But I'm not sure I would give him jail time.
So I'm going to go with no for you. Okay, yeah. Manju.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think would certainly not have that heavy a sentence. Yeah. I think that's just ridiculous and outrageous. So, can I say I'm not sure?
No, unacceptable. We will come back to you. Patrick.
Put me down for yes.
Okay.
But, okay, easy.
Okay.
But not 35 years.
Yeah. The sentence we all agree on.
Something between 35 years and Hadith, a guy who got, 2 hours and.
Yeah. So I think paying reparations, paying reparations would be one way. And also there's a way in which he needs, like, how you have sex offenders, and you have, despite the fact that there's a question about the law and consent, because it's consensual sex, but it's the lack of disclosure. But there's a way in which maybe he might have a list of sex offenders. Maybe he might be put on a list. Right. But the jail time just seems a little bit draconian, given the fact that if it's true that he's a sex addict, there may be some other issues.
But it's not informed consent, actually.
Right, it's not informed. It's not informed consent. Right. And then that raises a lot of issues, because I think if we're going to do it for HIV, you got to do it for everything.
No, I draw the line on HIV because it's life-threatening. I give him prison time. Nowhere near 32 years, and definitely the Haditha guy gets more prison time. Right. That's my analysis.
Out of all of this, I draw the line at really visiting Cincinnati just in general.
that should get you a prison time. All right. Now, I want to thank everybody that was involved in the show today. Of course, Russell Simmons sent in his point, And you can check out the website that he wants you to look at, occupythedream.com. Ilyse Hogue blogs at thenation.com. And of course, WCPO Channel 9 News in Cincinnati brought us the case of Andre Davis, and we want to thank them for using the clip. And I want to thank everybody on the panel. Robin Kelley is a professor of history at UCLA, and by the way, has a book called Freedom Dreams, The Black Radical Imagination, which you should check out on similar issues that we discussed today. And then Manjusha Kulkarni is with the South Asian Network, of course, and they are about to release a report about organizing and workers' rights in the South Asian American community here in Southern California. Yes, so we look forward to that. And Patrick Meighan, we look forward to more funny episodes of The Family Guy, which you guys have really delivered on. Thank you. Everybody talks about that show, as they do, of course, about The Point. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.